it's easy to get sidetracked and say, what's interesting here is how more progressive Torah Judaism is compared to Hammurabi, which is just a detail because, if you on the surface take a religion like Baha'i, then it's actually closer to our Western
Well,
liberal.
Baha'i was a late religion. What was it, 1800s or something? They came up with Baha'i. I mean, it's great. Like if I could choose, like Baha'i is fantastic. Like,
yeah. So it's easy to say there are religions that are even closer to Western liberal.
Yeah, and also, frankly, you can't say, like, for example, if you said on a Western with the Western rules, what is better? If a woman whose husband is a captive can go to another man, or if she can't, she's stuck. Right? Yeah. Like, which is a better situation? What sounds more liberal to you? Right? You could say an eye for an eye. Oh, it's not even, but for Bible, it's an eye for an eye across the board, right? And Hammurabi, at least some people just pay money. Like in some cases, you're not poking someone's eye out. So like, you can't really just say, oh yeah, the Bible's more progressive. You can say that in certain principles, the Bible's more progressive. But again, to say, as soon as you say that God cares about all these things, there's good and there's bad, right? Because if God cares about every little thing, then no, you can't just come to some kind of settlement and pay someone off, right?
But what I find most fascinating about the Code of Hammurabi and from what I gather, the other codes that were around at the time, is the cognitive dissonance in them. Because on one hand, you're living in a world in which nature is scary, and the gods are amoral and egotistical and self-centered and narcissistic, and yet you are coming up with an ethical code. Now, it may be an ethical code that's abhorrent to us, but it's still a code of ethics.
It's yes. Okay, so I want to make a correction. So they absolutely, look, he's talking about Shamash, who's this god of justice. In other words, Hammurabi's absolutely presenting it that the gods want justice. Okay, and in general, and maybe I'll reiterate this next week. It's not true that they're all like, oh, the gods don't care at all. When they present these codes, they're like, the gods want justice, right? And in Egypt, Ma'at is very, very central, right? There's not, it isn't this idea that the gods don't care about justice at all. When they present it, they say, yes, the gods are happy that I'm doing justice. It's just not the gods' job to do justice. They're giving it to me to do justice, right? But they want justice, right? And so look, again, Shamash is the god of justice, right? That's the idea. And so it's not true that they just think that all the gods are, going around, I don't know,
acting crazy.
Acting crazy. Right. And so I think, and I think this is also true in terms of, like, I don't know, the Greeks. I always wonder in terms of how the Greeks thought about their gods. Right. I mean, the Epicureans, their whole thing was like, do you think the gods care what we do? They don't care what we do. What would you do if you were a god? You'd sit in your garden and sip wine because you're a god. You wouldn't care about what people on earth do. So that's what we should do. We should sit in our gardens and drink wine, right? They don't care. But clearly there are people who are pointing to the Greek gods and saying that they want us to be moral. Now, I know, I've read plenty of Greek mythology. They're not super moral gods. Right? So I think in general, a lot of polytheistic systems have this kind of duality where they tell these stories where the gods are just horrible. And yet they have this kind of, I understand less about how the Greeks did it, frankly, than about how ancient Near East did it. Because as long as you have like a god like Shlomo, a god that cares about justice, then you're set. But, the Greek gods, I don't know how they flipped that to be that the Greek gods cared about ethics, honestly. Except in certain extreme cases, right? Anyway, so I could just keep going, but everyone wants to go. So,
all right.
So have a good night, everyone. I'll see you next week.
Congratulations